Everyone. Thank you all for joining us here. We're going to leave a few more minutes for more folks to start joining as we get to the top of the hour. About a minute left, and I guess we're now at 12 o'clock. So let's get started so we can try to stay on time. As we're about to going through the intros, I'll start presenting, and Deandra as well from CalBar Connect is going to show a few slides about CalBar Connect. But thank you everyone for joining us here. We're really excited to talk about generative AI or document automation, and specifically which one is right for your firm and how you can make these decisions in this very rapidly changing legal field. So I'll start off by handing it over to Deandra from CalBar Connect to show us and give us a little bit of information about CalBar Connect, and then we will dive into the webinar. And as we're going through this session, you can leave questions in the chat. Feel free to do that. I will, if the questions are relevant and I see them while I'm presenting, I'll answer them on the spot. Otherwise, I may leave them for the end, but we will leave a little bit of time at the end for questions as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Deandra.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dorna. And apologies, everyone. For some reason, we weren't able to figure out how to get my video to work for webinar style, but I'm really happy to be here. Again, Deandra Jones. I am the Affinity and Marketing Manager for CalBar Connect. Really excited to partner with Gavel on this webinar. We know that Dorna and the team at Gavel have been doing some amazing work in offering great resources related to document automation and AI. So we're really grateful to have you here today, Dorna. A quick bit about CalBar Connect for folks who are newly joining us. So CalBar Connect helps all licensed California lawyers run thriving practices while also working to build a better justice system for all Californians. So we offer discounts on quality products and services, from critical insurance coverage to innovative solutions to support attorneys in their practice. And all of our net revenues fund legal aid organizations, enhance justice initiatives, and fund fellowships for law students and new lawyers. We've received much feedback through our monthly newsletter and our subscriber survey that continued education on AI, how to use it in practice, and document automation would be really helpful. So we really hope that today's discussion serves you well. You can always visit calbarconnect.com to learn more about us and how we can continue to support you in your work. So thank you so much again, Dorna. I will go ahead and pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Deandra. Let's now go ahead and dive in. So with that, I will start with a little bit of background about myself and why I'm really the right fit to give you this presentation. So my name is Dorna Moini. I am the CEO of Gavel. I practiced law for nearly a decade, lasted as a litigator at Sidley Austin. And I now run Gavel, which is a legal automation infrastructure for lawyers and for law firms. We handle end-to-end automation for any work that's rules-based or process-oriented. What we do actually stemmed from some of the work that I did at my firm when I was still practicing, where I felt like there was so much of the work that we were doing that could be turned into more automated tools that could help me practice law better and practice at the top of my license and really provide the best service to our customers. It actually stemmed from some pro bono work that I was doing in domestic violence at the time, where I wanted to build an end-to-end tool, something sort of like TurboTax for some of our clients to be able to go through parts of the form generation and document generation process, where then I would be able to take over and assist them with the rest of the process, going to court for the hearing, taking on appeals, doing the much more fact intensive and legal intensive work. So I have a lot of background in technology and in the law. I also teach legal innovation and the legal innovation lab at a few different law schools. Specifically, I was an adjunct professor at USC's law school, but I also teach across different campuses. And then finally, I recently started some social channels that talk about how you can use technology in the law practice. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join those. Those are little bite-sized snippets of information. So all that to say, I'm definitely the right person to be talking to you about this topic today because I've practiced myself. I understand the technology intimately because we're building it at Gavel, and I work with lawyers on a daily basis to implement this type of technology in their practices. So before we get started on showing you the application of AI and the application of document automation in the legal field, I want to set the stage for how we are seeing the evolving nature of AI in the legal field. And as I'm sort of describing this, I would love for you guys to just drop in the chat whether or not you are using either document automation or AI or both, because that would be really interesting, I think, for everyone to be able to see inside of the chat as well. But first, I will say that in terms of generative AI and how it works within the legal field, we are only at the beginning. There is a lot of hype about this technology, and I think some of that hype has petered out a little bit from the beginning, but the real application is not fully concrete. At Gavel, we've had early access to many different technologies within the AI space, and the rate of progress in this area has been remarkable. So we're seeing new versions, new applications, new breakthroughs, and improved behavior on a pretty regular basis. So as we dive into this discussion, we want to be asking, what are we optimizing for? And we need to be, where are the changes happening in the legal field that are really propelling us to make these changes in our law practices? Because some of the, what sounds like the chat is disabled. Let's see. Try to figure that out. Well, let me, instead of taking up your time, I'm not sure why the chat isn't working, but I'm trying to figure that out in a minute. But let's keep going, and if anyone has any burning questions, we can get to those towards the end. So talking about the different applications of AI, first, there are certain forces in the market that are pushing in this direction. So on the consumer side, AI has the potential to have a huge impact on the delivery of legal services in taking over not in taking over the legal role, but really as an enabler. It can help lawyers do their best work in a way that is faster, higher quality, and more affordable. In the foreseeable future, though, it will not be able to do this alone. AI can provide support, automation, and data-driven insights while the lawyers are still bringing their own expertise and their own best judgment to get the best results for their clients. So that's sort of framing what the application and the implications are for the legal field. But there are also some concerns that I want to address up front. So concerns about being replaced and concerns about pricing, because those are the really panic headlines that we're seeing all across the news. Which I want to address up front. So will there be lawyers? We think not. There is a huge portion for a few reasons. One, there's a huge portion of Americans and Californians, around 80 to 90%, depending on which geography you're counting, who does not have access to legal services, but who can afford some form of legal services. So lawyers are going to be able to better serve them at potentially more scalable costs that still are profitable for the attorney. In addition to that, we also see that a lot of these lawyers are becoming much more efficient so that they're able to scale up those practices, charge in potentially different ways. And then finally, we have seen technology after technology over the course of many years, which I'll go over in a moment, being introduced into the legal field, lawyers saying, we're not sure what's going to happen to lawyers, and really the volume of legal work continuing to increase. And one example of that is legal research. So when legal research tools came online and you were able to use Lexis and Westlaw, people thought lawyers are not going to be in existence anymore. We don't need to sit in the library and look up all those cases. And clearly that has not happened. And if anything, the volume of litigation and the volume of legal work has continued to expand. And then finally, on that pricing issue, these models will need to change in many of the practice areas that are being impacted and affected by the technology that we're going to talk about. And I'll have a few slides on that towards the end of this presentation as well. All right, so quick look at the agenda. We're going to first start with what is going on in the legal field, how are we using AI terminology. Then we're going to talk about how and why lawyers use document automation in AI. Then we're going to talk about how to choose the right tool for your practice and really want to focus on this outcome-based approach. So we're not going to talk about what's the tool and how do you use the tool, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But mostly I want you to really come out of this session thinking, which one is right for me? Not because someone told me that this is a great tool and I want to use the tool, but because I really understand for my own practice what goal I want to get to, what I want my practice to look like. And then as a result of that outcome-based approach, decide on what tool I'm going to use to get me there. Then we'll talk about pricing models and how those are being affected. We'll talk about security and ethics considerations, and we'll dive into a few examples in the field. So starting with legal field and how it is changing and how it is it's moving and what that speed has been like. So how fast do we think tech adoption moves in the legal field? We oftentimes have an impression that what's happening now is the fastest thing that's happening. But when we look back, it's really interesting to see the types of technology that have impacted the legal field. So in 1986, about 7% of lawyers at large law firms even had a computer. 5 years later, in 1991, 69% did. In 1990, about 56% of law firms use local area networks, meaning networks that connect to the internet and allow them to share data in a limited area. 5 years later, in 1995, that number was 95%. Let's skip ahead 2 more years. In 1992, 5% of the top 500 law firms used online legal research, which is mostly Lexis and Westlaw. By 1996, so 4 years later, online legal research went up from 5 to 75%. And now, nearly a quarter of a century later, in 2019, 56% of firms believed that AI would be important for the legal industry. And today, 51% of lawyers have used it in some way, shape, or form. This includes the use of rules-based technology, no-code tools, and expert systems. And with that, about 1/3 of lawyers are using document automation technology regularly in their practice. So those are some interesting data points to start with. Now, the next thing I want to dive into is the terminology in the AI field, because are you guys not seeing the slides going forward? It sounds like you guys are still seeing the background slide. Oh, you can see them now. Okay, perfect. I'm really sorry about the chat. I don't want to take up your time to figure out the technical issues of the chat, but if I could just take 1 second to look through these. It looks like there is a Q&A that I can see. So just so I don't take up your time on technical issues, why don't you guys drop in your questions in the Q&A and I'll monitor that instead. All right, perfect. Let's move forward. Excellent. Okay, so moving over to AI terminology. So AI terminology, I think a lot of people get this wrong, and they don't know exactly how they're using the terminology. So for the sake of being able to use the terminology in the right way and being able to access the tools in the right way, I wanted to go over some of the hierarchy. So AI, what is it? It's actually a fairly broad term from the 1950s. Machine learning is one type of AI. Another type of AI is rules-based systems. So systems in which you can configure if this, then that logic rules. Now, machine learning is a subset of AI, refers to teaching computers to learn to make predictions or decisions based on data that we've given it without being explicitly programmed. So with machine learning, you're continuously exposing the machine learning algorithms to more and more data to improve their performance through experience and data analysis. Now, one layer below that in the hierarchy is really what we've been focused on and where the major breakthroughs have been happening in the past year or so, year and a half or so, which is generative AI. So generative AI is a type of machine learning. And generative AI can be prompted to, as the name suggests, generate something. So that could be text, pictures, videos, code, even audio and video. And when we're dealing with the legal field, what we mainly care about is that text area, the text generative AI, because that's, as lawyers, we're in the business of selling words. So that's the most important to us. So we have generative AI, and let's go one layer deeper now. Large language models. Large language models go one layer deeper, and we just talked about generative AI. LLMs, large language models, stands for LLMs. It seems like people are still seeing just me and not the slides. Is that right? Or just let me know if that's still the case, because I saw just another. Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward unless we see a few more people who are having that issue. All right. So large language models, one layer deeper, and they are a specific type of generative AI that specifically generates natural language text. They're also called LLMs. That's the acronym, and they're trained with data sets of text to learn to generate new text that mimics the style, structure, and content of the training data. So under that, there are several types of LLMs. One of these is GPT, the one that you've probably heard of the most, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. You don't really need to know that part. And that one, GPT, is created by the company OpenAI. ChatGPT is just a specific version of that GPT that is designed in a chat-based interface for conversational responses. Another company that does the same thing is Anthropic, and their version is Claude. So a little bit of background on that. If you have any questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A, and I can dive deeper into any of those. But with that, let's move over to our next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about document automation, generative AI, how they differ, and how you can choose one or the other or both. So generative AI creates new content based on learned patterns from data. Document automation, on the other hand, uses predefined templates and rules to assemble those documents. So document automation is rules-based and relies on structured inputs to generate consistent is a very key word here, consistent outputs, whereas generative AI can adapt and create text dynamically based on broader inputs. And you can already see from just the description that I've given of those two that they're going to have potentially different use cases, because there are some situations where you want consistent answer, same answer every single time with the same set of facts. But there are other situations where you might want something new and something novel to be generated each time. So let's talk about some of the reasons. And really, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, I really want you to be thinking, one of the biggest problems I see with tech adoption these days is that a lot of lawyers come in, and we see this, I run a legal software company. And so we see a lot of lawyers come in to us and say, I want this type of tool, but they haven't thought enough about why they want it and the actual outcome they're trying to get to. So that's why I really want to set up some of this framework of why we're automating, what's the impetus behind the move towards technology, and so that you can make the decisions in the right way for your firm. So starting with why should we automate? So think about it as the 3 R's: reduce wasted time, increase revenue, and reimagine the client experience. So reducing wasted time, you want to make sure that both your time and the client's time is reduced. You're spending less time to get the output that you want, and quality and effective output. Revenue. So especially as we're seeing competition across the field, more flat fees and more alternative fees, more push from clients for lawyers to be using technology, we want to figure out how can we do that but still increase our revenue. So are you going to have new time that you can spend on other things? Are you going to have new offerings that could potentially have higher margins and higher profitability? And could you have new markets? Are there new areas and potential not only geographies if that's possible for you, but also just different types of customer profiles, client profiles that you can address now with the use of technology? So that's the revenue piece. And then reimagining the client experience. This is really about making sure that you are remaining competitive within the client landscape and you're providing the best practice that you can. So think about this as really what could your practice look like? We tend as the legal field to really, we've followed a similar business model for many, many years that hasn't really changed much. And it's really interesting to look at other industries and see how can we be applying some of those models to our own practices, not to make things more affordable or to make legal services free or to put ourselves out of jobs, but really to help ourselves do work that we love more and generate more revenue. Talking about document automation specifically, document automation, a lot of times I hear people ask me, is that like AI? I can't tell you how many times I've gotten this question. So I would say if you're not already using document automation in your law firm, it is from the data that we've seen on tools that are being used for generating work product and for technology in the practice. It is one of the most popular areas, and it is one of the lowest hanging fruit ways to implement technology in your practice. So about 1/3 of lawyers right now are using document automation in their practice. And it is the process of using software to generate legal documents automatically based on rules that you've created inside of a system. So what you'll do is you'll start with a questionnaire, which can be either a client intake that you send to your clients or an internal questionnaire that you or your team complete with client information, or a combination of both. It could be multiple sets of data entry. Then once you gather that client information, you will automatically populate that information into your document sets based on rules that you have set up. So if you use robust enough document automation system, you can embed complex rules into your custom documents. For example, you can set up rules that dictate when certain portions of your documents are generated, how lists of information like children and grandchildren are populated in the document. And you can set up complex logic and calculations. So on average, it's found that lawyers who use document automation are saving between 80 to 90% of the time that it would have taken them to generate those documents. And this is from a study that was done specifically on estate planning, family, and corporate lawyers. So that's the data from, just to be more precise on the practice areas that this study was done. So document automation, we have a little bit of background on that. Document automation is also helping you with the 3Ds. Those 3Ds are data, documents, and delivery. So data, what is all the information that you want to gather from your clients, whether that's incoming, whether that's data that you're going to reuse for future document sets for these clients, whether that's conditional, so maybe asking them certain questions but not asking them other questions. If for example, let's say you're a divorce attorney and if they don't have children, there's a ton of data that you don't need from them, you can add collapsible logic in these types of tools to make sure that that's not being asked. Second is documents. So once you have that data, what are you going to do? You're generating documents out of it with a bunch of rules. Those can be in many different formats. With most lawyers, it's usually either in Word format from templates that you have, or in PDF format from judicial council forms or other court forms that you might have as well. And then finally is the delivery. So you are delivering your documents in a certain way after you've generated them. Is that going to be by email, through client portal, through some sort of post, through some sort of webhook into another system? So those are the three main components that you should think about on how the document automation process is working. So that's document automation. Now let's talk about generative AI. How are lawyers using generative AI for their legal practices, and what are they using it for? This is where it will be really important to distinguish the types of tasks you use AI for and the types of tasks that you use document automation for. In the generative AI field, some of the areas that we've seen be most successful and useful are I would say that there are three main big picture ones: drafting, creating summaries, and then brainstorming or ideation. And within that, you have issue identification. You also have, I've sort of outlined those three for specific legal work, but there's also a lot of operational work that you could do with generative AI. So you may have HR tasks, admin tasks, billing, invoicing. Those are a little bit, especially if you're worried about the risks and the concerns of consistent work product when you're dealing with your legal work product. That's the operational side of your business is one area where it's good to start implementing AI first, because it's lower risk. So, if you have a little bit of misspelling in an invoice, that's not as big of a deal as if you have some wrong case cited in your documents. And obviously we'll talk about the ethical issues of reviewing your cases and all of that's been in the news as well. So think about the operational side that you can use generative AI for, but then also think about some of the different legal areas you can use it for. So diving a little bit deeper into each of those, just briefly, drafting, that might be things like contract generation, particularly if they are not from predefined templates. If you are generating documents that need new and novel clauses each time, if they're not going to be novel and new, and if there is a set of rules that you can apply to decide which paragraphs are generated, you might want to use document automation instead. Drafting in the litigation space is ripe for generative AI, particularly when you're using legal research tools. Having those legal research tools help you with drafting some version of copy. With all of this, I will give the huge caveat that you need to treat the generative AI tools specifically. The rules-based tools are a little bit less, they're not really risky because you know what the outcomes are going to be based on rules that you've implemented in the system. But the generative AI tools, you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be when you give it a prompt. So you do need to be 100% sure you're reviewing, checking every site, treat it like a really, really, really junior intern that you don't trust and you need to make sure, but that will help you get up and running. So drafting in the litigation space is really ripe for legal research tools, citations, and some level of drafting, and even just reviewing. Like a really basic tool you could implement in your practice is use Grammarly and install it on your computer. It'll edit your phrases and make them a little bit tighter. So that's a really low risk place to start. So talked about drafting a little bit. Let's talk about creating summaries. So summaries could be case law summarization, could be document summarization. So maybe you have a large set of documents and you want to see in discovery. Discovery is a very, very good area for this. You want to see what are the hot docs and what are the important things that I should be looking at. You might still want to do another manual review, but it really speeds up the speed at which you can start collecting the data that you need, particularly with really, really large data sets. So research summaries and document summaries. And then finally is brainstorming or ideation. One really interesting use case that I saw another lawyer use generative AI for is, I think we sometimes are tempted to go on to ChatGPT or whatever it may be, whether you have a legal specific tool or whether you're using some of the general models, drop a brief that maybe the opposing party has written and say, draft me a reply brief. Another interesting thing you might want to do is ask the AI tool to instead draft you the judicial opinion. what I think is really interesting there is it can point out the flaws and the potential risks and really guide you towards where you should be focusing your reply on and where the weak and the strong positions are. So brainstorming and ideation is a really good place to have it help you craft new legal arguments and suggest relevant topics, legal precedents, or even counter arguments based on legal trends. All right. And please do drop, I'm just going to take a quick look and see if anyone had any questions. It doesn't look like there are any new questions, so I will keep going and I will leave a little bit of time at the end as well. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So going back to an outcome-based approach. So the biggest issue for lawyers is to decide what is the desired outcome of the technology that you're implementing. You guys are here today because you want to know, how should I be implementing this technology in my practice? But I want to tell you, take a step back and think about what your practice looks like, and what is the vision that you have for your practice. How does it work operationally in the future? And where do you think some of the inefficiencies that you might have currently are? So to think about this, you really want to think about one of the phrases that I really love is, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So don't start with the tool, start with the outcome. And to do this, we want to think about first, what is the practice area that you are operating in. So do you use templates to draft legal work product? If you do, that might be a place for document automation. Are you drafting novel legal clauses every single time that are not similar to anything you've drafted in the past? If you are, then that might be a place for generative AI to help give you more definitions and more custom crafted language. So first thing about the practice area, second thing about the complexity of the legal work. So if the legal tasks involve complex, nuanced reasoning or require tailored content that varies significantly from case to case, then generative AI might be a more appropriate tool for you to use. But for standardized, repetitive tasks, document automation might be more suitable. One thing I really want to laser in on the document automation side is that it's not that you can't build complex things into document automation, as long as you can build rules into the system. So if this and or this, no matter how long that string is, then you can build it into document automation tools. So it doesn't necessarily have to be simple. It just needs to be rules based, and that might actually still be a very complex system. So complexity and nuanced nature of the legal work. Third is volume of customization. So if your practice frequently requires customized non-standard documents or content that's not easily captured by those predefined templates, then generative AI can provide the flexibility. On the other hand, if it requires, it can be standard and has fairly minimal variation, then document automation might be more efficient. Next thing I want you to think about is your resource availability. So everyone on this webinar is at a different type of firm, different practice areas, different sizes of firms. So consider the resources that you have available in your practice. Do you have the time, expertise, and technology infrastructure to implement a generative AI tool? Or would it be easier for you to start with a document automation tool that might be easier to implement because you have clear templates and rules? So that also plays into the last thing I have here, which is cost consideration. So if cost is a significant factor, then document automation can be more cost effective for routine tasks, because generative AI, even after the initial setup, requires a bit of a greater investment in technology and oversight, which is potentially justifiable for more complex tasks. And then finally, the second to last one I have on this list here is risk tolerance. So if your practice has low tolerance for errors or deviations from really clearly established standards, then document automation, which has strict rules and templates, might be safer, whereas generative AI might be more powerful, but might introduce a variability that could require a more thorough review. So you would need to review all of those individually. All right, moving over to the next slide. I now want to just touch on some of the different practice areas that we're seeing the use of either or tool in. So starting, what are the common uses for document automation in legal settings? Let's start with intake. So intake, even just the client intake can be used within a document automation tool where you send over an intake to your clients, you have them enter their data into it. So a lot of lawyers, I mean, a lot of clients are really wanting a digital first law firm. They don't want to come into your firm and answer your questions in person. They don't want to get on a phone call with you. They really want you to send them an intake form that they can sit in front of Netflix and answer on their couch and on their phone. So that's really the new way that a lot of clients are, not all, but many clients are wanting to consume their legal services. So starting with the intake, then the generation of the documents, and then having a client portal where your client can come back, enter information, leave, come back. So some of the popular areas that document automation is a really great way to implement is our estate planning and probate, corporate law, family law, and immigration. All of those are have rules-based elements in a lot of the practice, and they have forms and templates that you can automate, or that systems, like we have some of these pre-built workflows that you can work from. At Gavel, you have templates that are already automated for you that you can work from, or you can automate your own templates. So what about on the AI side? Some of the practice areas that might make more sense there are anything with high volume document review, or data analysis, or regular monitoring of regulatory changing and ensuring compliance. So that's another place that you can implement AI tools, is to give you information about what's going on in the field and what new rules have come out. And that's a little bit less of the drafting side, but it's a very valuable place to implement technology into your practice. All right, so I want to touch now on something that's very related and is also a big consideration on which of these tools you are deciding to use inside of your practice. So what does all of this mean for the pricing model, for the lawyer's pricing model? One of the biggest issues, and one of the most important aspects of which you use is your pricing model. So there are a few different pricing models that you might want to consider if you're using automation, or whether that's document automation, AI, or other technology that's making your work more efficient in your practice, that might allow you to have higher volumes and more profitability. So here's 6 that you should consider. One is fixed or flat fees. So this means that you have a pre-agreed fee for a specific task or a set of tasks, which gives your clients predictability and allows you to make more money if you're more efficient. So we actually, there was a report, I believe it was the ABA, we have it in our Gavel Legal Trends report, of about 135 firms that were surveyed. About 50% of revenues were generated through flat fee arrangements instead of hourly. So this just demonstrates to you where the field is moving. And a lot of that is because of the efficiencies that are being introduced and the demand side, the client side, push towards these types of models. So flat fees are probably the first that I would start with. Second is subscription fees. So if you use subscription fees or for on-demand access to your services, that could be one way of making your firm more profitable with new models. So for example, your clients could subscribe to a set of templates. For example, is ones that you build through a document automation system, or they could subscribe to your advice and counsel. And you will have higher volume months and lower volume months, but especially in those areas where you have those templates that are automated, that requires zero of your time and allows you to just generate revenue from giving them a tool. It's like you're becoming essentially a software provider. And while you have to maintain those software tools, it really enables you to scale out your practice and serve more people with less resources. Third is phase-based. So this is set fees for different stages of a case, like demand letter could be one piece, discovery, pretrial, trial, etc. Fourth is unbundled services. So here your services are broken into parts, letting clients pay only for what they need which can increase volume and also be used in conjunction with tech-enabled legal services. Fifth is portfolio pricing. So you may want to give your clients a fixed fee for a portfolio of matters. For example, all of the employment cases that they get in a year. Sixth is contingency. So obviously these work better for certain practices than others, and many of you are probably already implementing these if you are in those practice areas, but you're paid on achieving results, but your results obviously could be outsized. And then finally is legal products. So this is a really interesting one. We are seeing more and more attorneys moving towards turning their legal services into legal products. And the productization of legal services means that you're taking all of your expertise and building it out into a system, putting it in front of your clients, and then having different touch points with them. So you might have a hybrid model where your clients are accessing your legal services online, they're generating part of the work, and maybe that work, they're entering that data, that work product is coming to you, you're doing a review, you send it back to them, but you're really working hand in hand with the technology. So it could be as hybrid or as DIY as you want it to be and as really makes sense for your practice. For example, we've seen divorce lawyers implement these types of practices quite a bit, where they will either, for uncontested divorces, have completely DIY systems that they have their clients go through and generate, uncontested, no kids, no property, generate divorce process, and they're just getting paid for that because they become the software platform. And then by contrast, you might have a contested divorce where you do part of that work through technology, you interact with the client through the portal that they're entering their data in, and then you charge them at different bases of the case. So really want to challenge you guys coming out of this session to think about the new models that you could be implementing and how you can exponentially increase your revenue through some of these new models that may be a little bit different, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but really I think you will see the impact of if you put your all into it and you have the right considerations for your firm and your practice area. All right. So that is pricing models. If you guys do have any questions on any of this, I will leave a little bit of time at the end, but feel free to drop those in the Q&A channel. But with that, I'm going to move over to AI security considerations. So what presentation for lawyers would be complete without security and ethics considerations? I'm sure this is something that you guys are thinking about a lot, and particularly on, are you going to change some of your fee agreements and your retainer agreements and your engagement letters to ensure that you are abiding by the different ethical rules, but then also making sure that you're asking the right security questions of the vendors that you're potentially working with and that you're assessing. If you guys are at larger firms, you likely have an IT team who is sending out questionnaires on these. If you're at a smaller firm, you might not have that. So I really want to give you guys the tools to ask the right questions that are going to not take up too much of your time, but are going to get you the maximum security and the maximum answers on what really matters. So let's dive into vendor security checklist. So this is really, I'm trying to give you your short vendor security checklist. If you are signing up for legal software that incorporates AI, this is basically your checklist of what to ask. And I actually meant to drop a link to a physical checklist that I have on this topic. So maybe I can send it to you all afterwards because I can't put it in the chat. So I'll send it over in an email. But question number one is, where is my data going as part of your partnership with the AI model? So this is the question you are asking of the security vendor that you're thinking about working with. About this question, most legal software solutions integrate with large language models from major companies like OpenAI, Google, or Anthropic, which have multiple tiers of service for that legal software company. And those multiple levels of tiers of service allow for varied use of the data that is sent to their models. So, for example, at Gavel, our partnership with OpenAI, which is the main one that we use, although we benchmark, which means we test different tools to make sure that we're using the one that performs the best. So vocabulary word for you guys there, benchmarking AI tools. So we benchmark against these other tools, but the tools that OpenAI has our have varied levels of those data, but our partnerships prevent the LLMs from retaining or using your data for training. I do see a question here, which is a very valid one from Martin about how do you verify the vendor's security answers? Unfortunately, that is a little bit tough. We have a similar issue right now going on with privacy law, and how do you actually verify that software companies, whether it's what they're doing with AI models, whether it's what they're doing with their privacy systems, are actually what they're doing. You sort of have to just trust that as long as the company is one that is backed by other lawyers, that has been around for a little bit, that they're likely trying to avoid litigation because some of that could be found out either from internal whistleblowers or as they grow. I suppose one thing you could do is you could ask them for some sort of receipt or a screenshot of the tier that they're on. For example, like OpenAI has different tiers of service, and so you could potentially ask them for some sort of verification of the tier that they're on with OpenAI. I've actually never heard of anyone doing that. I think mostly people have been operating on blind trust, but that is a really good question, and is something that you could do to ensure that. But for the most part, most software companies that have been around for a little bit are trying to do the right thing and avoid litigation. So they are giving the information based on what is true, because there are internal folks who would probably be whistleblowers in the other case. So let me know if you have any other questions on that. I am also seeing another question about whether you'll be able to download the presentation. I can send this over to you guys afterwards. Maybe I'll send an email to everyone with the presentation and that security checklist. All right, perfect. Moving over to question number 2. So question number 2 that I would ask your vendor security, on your vendor security checklist that I would ask your legal tech vendor is, how is my data being used by your software application? So aside from the LLM partnership, which is the first question, you'll also need to verify that your client data, so your client's data, isn't being used for purposes other than what you've signed up for. So as an example, at Gavel, we guarantee that your client data is not used to train our own models, and we ensure that data from each client is isolated and stored securely and separately to ensure that there's no possibility of unauthorized access. Question number 3, where is my data being stored? So ask where the data is being stored and what security measures the software company is taking. So data stored in the cloud, which is what most software companies are doing now. There are some older ones that are not storing data in the cloud, but for the most part, most of the modern companies are storing data in the cloud. Data should be encrypted with end-to-end encryption, in transit and at rest, with encryption key management and data segregation. I'll send you all of this in an email so that you have it as well. Question number 4, what are my data retention and deletion rights? So particularly if you're in a jurisdiction without robust privacy protections, you want to make sure you understand the vendor's data retention and deletion policies. For example, we at Gavel commit to delete all customer data within a certain period of time after the termination of an account or upon a customer's request. So you'll also want to make sure that they're compliant with jurisdictional privacy and regulatory standards like GDPR and in California, obviously CCPA. So there's your legal vendor security checklist. Moving over to legal ethics. So this is also a topic that I want to briefly cover because it's an important one. We're not doing an entire AI ethics CLE. However, I will say I'm pretty confident. I've read and consumed a lot of data and information on AI and how it impacts ethics. And I think I can give you most of the takeaways of a 1-hour AI ethics CLE in about a minute or 2 here on this slide. So to set a little bit of the framework for California, because you guys are mostly, I'm assuming everyone here is in California. The State Bar of California in November of 2023 approved guidelines for generative AI use that were developed by the State Bar's Committee on Professional Responsibility and Conduct. So but make sure you take a look at those. But here are the 6 rules that you should really be thinking about as you are implementing AI inside of your practice. So one is confidentiality. AI applications need access to significant amounts of data. So when you're using an AI tool, make sure you're using a secure provider who can tell you how your data is handled. Number 2, duty of competent and diligent representation. So if you're doing legal work, it should obviously be in an area that you're competent in. You can augment yourself through AI, just like you do with legal research and with automation, but you need to stay informed about the risks and the implications of the tools that you're using and what the responses are. 3 is duty to supervise. So I think I said it was a little bit earlier, but really think of AI as being your very, very, very junior intern who you don't 100% trust. It's their first day on the job and you really want to check their work every single time. So supervise the AI's work just as you would an intern's. That means you site check and make sure that all of those legal cases say what you wrote they say in your brief. Think about FRCP 11, everyone. And this is one that hopefully we've definitely seen a lot of terrible, I mean, unfortunately for those news cases, the lawyers in the news cases, but fortunately for you guys, because it didn't happen to you, and you got an example to scare you a little bit, but we've seen some of those news cases of people using AI drafted and generated legal research and the site's being completely off. So make sure that you don't end up in that situation. I'm sure none of you will. 4 is reliability. So for a logic-based tool, reliability, for a non-logic-based tool, reliability is critical. Of course, if you're embedding rules into the system yourself, meaning you have control over the AI like you do with an expert system, like a no-code system, then you have more certainty and more control over the process, and this is much less of a concern. 5 is false representations about your work product. So this is really common sense, but it's listed in every single, there were some new ABA regulations on AI. It's listed in the in many of the ethics opinions that have come out on AI across the world, really. False representations about your work product. So it's common sense. If you're billing hourly, only bill for the time you actually spent on it. 6 is informed consent. So this is an interesting one. Some state bars require you to get informed consent from clients before using a third-party generative AI tool, especially if the third-party tool uses or commingles data. California has not said that in the opinion, the state bar opinion that I mentioned a little bit earlier, California has not said that informed consent is required in all cases, but it has said that, quote, that lawyers, quote, must not input any confidential information of the client into a generative AI tool to a generative AI solution that lacks adequate confidentiality and security protections. And if they do, and the data is not anonymized, then informed consent is required. So if your data is not anonymized, then informed consent is required in California. But there are easy ways to hedge around that. You can, any of these tools, you can sort of give hypothetical situations instead of actually giving your client information, particularly if you're asking it questions. All right, so what action can you take now based on some of what we've seen here? 2 main places I would start making changes in my practice would be to, 1, disclose the use of AI in your engagement letters if you are using it in an anonymized way, particularly in California. If you are joining us from another state, take a look at your local rules. And then start thinking about alternative business models and like flat fees or subscription fees so that both you and your clients can benefit from the use of technology, particularly if you think this is going to make you more efficient, which is good in some ways. And obviously, if you're on the hourly model is not as good. So you want to get ahead of it and make sure that, that you're operating in the right way. All right, I'm just going to take a look at some of the, looks like there are, Martin said, from what I gleaned from media accounts of the many data breaches, a big problem is that the stored data is not encrypted. Great point. Very good point. Very important. Very, very important question to at least ask your vendor. Another thing that I would actually say, again, this is one of those things that we never really get asked for, but one thing you could do is we, for example, at Gavel, we use AWS to store data. It's Amazon Web Services. It's very secure, but AWS also has SOC 2 reports. that maybe you as the lawyer don't really want to read through the entire SOC 2 report, but just asking those questions can make sure that the vendor is has their documentation in place. And then another thing that I would ask them is whether they are using the right vendors, but also whether they have internal policies and procedures to ensure the safety of data. But that's not really an AI specific concern. That's really just a security question you should be asking in all situations. All right, thank you, Martin, for that question. And then final question that I see in the Q&A here is document automation in GenAI seems like a game changer for small nonprofit law firms working with limited resources. With respect to GenAI specifically, I'm assuming ChatGPT is one of the cheapest and most accessible options. What are some top arguments you'd highlight to persuade a small law firm to subscribe to another GenAI tool versus simply using ChatGPT to supplement work? Great point. So I'll touch on a few pieces of what was mentioned there. Yes, I think especially for firms working with limited resources, very, very important use case and very impactful to use technology, whether it's the generative AI tools or whether it's the rules-based automation tools. Gavel actually started in the legal aid space. We now work with legal aids firms and organizations quite a bit as well, but we mostly work with small and mid-sized law firms. But that was an area where we thought that we could have a big impact. And if you look at some of my social channels that I'll share at the end here, you can see a few examples of really impactful work that's being done. One that I thought was really interesting is like a foster care legal app that's being built by a legal aid organization out of Florida. So arguments that you'd highlight to persuade a small law firm to subscribe to another Gen AI tool. I think the considerations there are whether you could potentially get more value from a tool that already has been trained on some of those different legal areas. So ChatGPT is great for probably a lot of the work that you're doing, but maybe you might want to think about something like Casetext Co-Counsel for legal specific legal research, because they specialize in all of the legal data that they already have and that they can send over to you. It's called retrieval augmented generation. So they have a database of all that data that they're pinging every time that you have that information. Whereas ChatGPT comes from all across the internet. There are some of these legal specific tools that might be drawing that information directly from those legal cases. So legal research is one area that I would say might be good to use a legal specific Gen AI tool. Discover is another one. So not everything is just asking questions and getting answers. You might have areas where you're loading a bunch of documents and you need the infrastructure to be able to review those documents. So those are, I think, the two biggest ones: legal research and the discovery use case. All right. What are some examples of fixed fee services? I'll note a few. Maybe I'll touch on 3 practice areas that you could do this with. So example, I gave the example of uncontested divorce before. So that's an area where you're probably pretty clear on how long this is going to take you to generate the documents for an uncontested divorce. And so you could provide a fixed fee, like let's say you charge them $500, $1,000 for the uncontested divorce. You might not even have to have a lot of interaction with the client, but you're not charging by the hour. You're just charging by the fixed fee. Yes, it is a little bit based on your hourly rate, because you might be thinking back on, well, how many hours is this actually going to take me and how do I price this model? But it allows you to actually create more margin, because especially if you're not spending very much time at all on these cases, you can have a fixed fee that is affordable and makes sense for the client, but that also doesn't really take up as much of your time. So that's the divorce context. In the corporate context, we've seen tools that actually put more in the hands of clients. So creating automated templates through document automation system, and then putting those in front of your clients and having your clients go through those. You could do those on a fixed fee or on a flat fee or on a per use fee. And then estate planning is another area. If you have a specific practice area, I can give an example there too. But estate planning is another area where we see a lot of fixed fees, because you have a little more predictability depending on the types of cases you have, on how long it's going to take you. So you can say, this is how much it's going to cost to generate an estate plan and the accompanying documents for example, a couple. All right. Perfect. And then the last question I see here is the opinion that I referenced from the state bar. Let me just tell you the exact, it is, it's the practical guidance for use of generative artificial intelligence. Actually, you know what? I believe I'm able to type an answer here. So I'm going to type the link here and send it to you guys. So for anyone who's curious, I just dropped that into the answer for that question. So if you want to Google it, it's the practical artificial intelligence in the practice of law. It's by the State Bar of California's Standing Committee on Professional Responsibility and Conduct. All right, amazing. So I think we're at about time. One last thing, I actually did have some examples that we didn't really have time to go through. So I'll send those over in the slides, but those might be interesting for you guys. But the last thing I wanted to look at is just give you guys all my contact information and more information on anything that you need. So again, my name is Dorna. I have recently started some social channels where I talk all about legal tips for lawyers and talk about how lawyers are using technology, which might be interesting to all of you. Short snippets. If you want to follow me at Dorna@Gavel on all socials, it's the same handle. For legal tech tips, that would be wonderful. And if you're interested in using Gavel, you can book a Gavel demo with us. The link is up on these slides as well, and we'd love to show you around. And our team is really wonderful and really giving you guidance, whether you want to use Gavel or just want to chat through some of the legal tech considerations. We would love to do that with you. And yes, as Deandra just mentioned, California attorneys get 10% off Gavel subscription fees for the first 12 months of any new subscription. And if you're a CLA member, you get $50 credit towards the first month of the subscription fees and 10% off subscription fees for the first 12 months of any new subscription. So feel free to look at that link that Deandra just dropped in the chat, and which I'm not sure is available to everyone. It's calbarconnect.com/offers/gavel. And honestly, if you just mention CalBar or CalBar Connect when you talk to any of our representatives, or if you email us, we will give you that discount. So you don't necessarily have to have the specific code. We'll add the code for you on the back end as well. All right, perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Really lovely presenting this presentation to you guys. I love this topic, and I hope you all learned something valuable from it. Feel free to contact me if you have any other questions, and I will be in touch after the webinar with some of the resources that I promised you guys during the presentation. All right, talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lorna. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Deandra and CalBar Connect.